engaging conversation with Mr. Tagore. Before we start the conversation formally, allow me to tell you what I personally feel about vintage cars from a very layman's perspective. You people are experts, I am not. And there's no forms in repeating that. But let me tell you, for me, vintage cars are not just cars. They are moving pieces of heritage, moving pieces of history. My mind goes back to the car which was used by Nath when he used to travel from Calcutta to the Vishwabharati campus in Shantiniketan, Bolpur. There are several very rare pictures of that car. And I don't know what the status of that car is today, but had it been, or presuming that it is not restored, had it been in the best condition for the people to go and visit it, it would be a glimpse of that particular period. Now, similar stories are connected with Netaji Subhash Chandra Bose. In fact, as I was coming this morning, I saw that Mahatma Gandhi rode a red-colored Ford when he went on a protest in Bihar, in Ranchi, as it was then. Similar stories of Pandit Nehru's fascination with his Chevrolet. He was obsessed with it. Although, there are situations where we perceive such great tall leaders to have a certain kind of simple living. There was an obsession with these cars. So it's much more than a four-wheeler. Now, Calcutta, when we talk about Calcutta, we are talking about heritage buildings. We are talking about cultural icons. We are talking about great leaders, great figures. But one part of Calcutta, which is more often than not ignored, silently, is that of the heritage cars that are part of this city's ecosystem. Perhaps that is where I would like to start. First and foremost, sir, welcome. And thank you for agreeing to do this. Where does CBC trace its origin? Why did it start in the first place?
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for inviting me at this talk. And I'd like to warmly welcome all the spectators here who are part of this talk, especially members from Classic Drivers Club who today have brought their cars which are parked in the parking lot. So, Sourav, as far as CDC is concerned, back in 2017, there were three youngsters, one of them being me, who were very passionate about historic vehicles. Each of us three had a historic vehicle which was either running at that point of time or was in the process of restoration. And one evening when we were driving one of our cars together on Red Road, it just occurred to us, Calcutta is missing a community for historic vehicles. It's not like Calcutta has not had a tradition of showcasing vintage and classic cars and bikes. The Statesman Vintage and Classic Car Rally started in 1968 in Calcutta. That was the first edition. Delhi was the first edition in 1967. Calcutta followed in 1968. And thereafter, the annual calendar for historic vehicles in Calcutta was the Statesman and Vintage Car. Unfortunately, over the decades, with the downfall in Calcutta's economic performance, a lot of these really good cars, exotic cars and bikes, left Calcutta and migrated to other cities and were even exported. And in the 2000s came a scenario where, in spite of the Statesman Rally being there, the owners really didn't know each other. You know, we would meet once in a year on the rally field in Eastern Command, but the majority of us didn't know each other. There was no community. So we wanted to create a platform where we could bring historic vehicle owners together to pool in our collective passion, our knowledge, and build a resource which would help historic vehicle owners in sharing knowledge, acquiring parts, keeping the cars and bikes going, and after that also showcasing the community as a whole to the public and increasing public awareness. So that is how CVC was born in 2017.
Sourcing parts was something which I would really want you to elaborate on. I'll come to it later. But before I get into the more serious questions, allow me to ask you that when a fully restored vehicle stands in front of you and you hear the revs, the engine, what is that feeling that you get?
It's a feeling of, frankly, there's just one word: joy. Immeasurable pleasure and joy. You know, to see a car or bike which has been authentically restored, it sort of, I mean, these cars have been born long before most of us have. We've only read in books, seen on the internet what these cars were like when they were new, or seen in catalogs, etc. So when somebody restores a car which corresponds to the period when it was new, you know, it is literally traveling back in time.
It's a kind of a time machine.
Absolutely.
Now, talking about restoration and perfect restoration, there was something which I was reading about. Like I told you that as a layman, our resources are limited. We have to depend on Google for it, right? So, there were two kinds of restoration which were being spoken about. One is that the car is restored to a running condition, and the other is the paint of the car is taken back to as it was when it came out of the factory for the first time. When it came out of the factory for the first time. And then there is another school of thought which says that no, you keep it as it was, as it were, and you reflect the wear and tear which has gone along with it. Now, what is perfect restoration? Is there a perfect restoration? Is there a defining term for it? Or is it subjective?
I would think that it is subjective. To my mind, there is no perfect restoration. In fact, there is a global debate on what exactly, you know, makes the best restoration. So you've actually asked multiple questions within that one question. You said, let the things be as they were and then restore it. Now, in order to do that, one has to get a base historic vehicle. The base historic vehicle has to be very authentic and sound to start with. Now, this is something that very few of us actually get in our lifetime. You know, you come across a car which has been lovingly maintained since it was new, and it is almost entirely original, except its tire. And therefore you need to restore certain aspects of this. We call this a sympathetic restoration. We don't restore everything. We keep the patina, you know, we keep all the good bits, the original bits, everything. It's only mechanical aspects which of course to be safe on the road, you need to mechanically overhaul consumables, tires, perishable items, etc. Those are things which are replaced in a sympathetic restoration. However, all the 4 cars and the 2 bikes which are parked in this arena, they, barring the Studebaker, which has been in the 1928 Studebaker, which has been in the royal family since new, which is remarkable in itself. I mean, not many people forget India, not many people in the world can claim that they have a 1928 car which has been in the family since new. Barring that particular car, which was a good base to start with, but that was tired, which I'm sure the owner will agree. I have seen that car in Statesman over the years, and a lot of work had to go into bringing it back to its original shape. He stuck to the original colors, etc. So now, coming back to your point on colors, if you're taking part in a global competitive event, like maybe you've heard of Pebble Beach, if you're taking part in a concourse elegance like Pebble Beach, the judges are absolute sticklers for absolute authenticity. They want the paint to be what it was when the car was new.
Despite any scratch which may have come over the years.
No, then it falls in the preservation category.
Okay.
If you're taking part in the concourse category, they expect your car to appear like it rolled out of the showroom.
Alright.
But that is right the top tier of global historic values. Increasingly in India there is a growing trend because of Western influence to turn out cars during restoration to conform to standards when it was new. However, it is an individual's car, and in many cases the car may not have been produced in the most attractive color in its day. And after all, it is, a personal, it's an extension of yourself, of your personality. So, if you want it in a period color, even though it may not have been that color when it started out with, one is welcome to do so, and people do so, and judges do not deduct points, and it's not frowned upon. As long as it's, not baby pink or, metallic gold or something like that. Otherwise, everything goes.
Now, talking about restoration, that is as an outsider to this ecosystem. My question is, it must be very, very difficult to source parts, to source that particular part which may not be in manufacture anymore, may not be easily available in India. You have to get it from abroad. So how do you deal with this challenge? There are other challenges for sure, but perhaps the biggest roadblock which comes your way when you're trying to restore something is sourcing of parts. So how do you deal with this challenge?
See, the individual has to assess what their budget is. First and foremost, one has to determine what your budget is. Once you determine a budget for a restoration, then things fall into place. Now, for example, in the case of this 1928 Studebaker, because it is a very limited production car, it's one of only 2 limousines of its particular model in the world. There are certain parts which are not available anywhere in the world. So if you need to replace something, you have to get someone who has the know-how to replicate that part, to fabricate that part. That you have to do. On the other hand, The 1928 Ford, which belongs to the Palcho Grace and was part of the drive today. The 1928 Ford, even though it's the same year as the Studebaker, is a very popular and was a mass-produced car back in the day. So if you want parts for a 1928 Model A Ford, you will get it in America. You will get it in America. But then again, these four cars which are parked here, the Trans Spitfire, the MGTC, the Mercedes, you won't get the parts in India. You have to have the budget to import them from abroad. Importing them abroad is only the first step, in 3 steps to import, because it's the cost, it's the cost of the part. Then you have to pay for the shipping to India, and shipping rates are pretty high nowadays. And then on top of that, the government of India imposes a fairly substantial duty on import of motor vehicle parts. So you have to be prepared to pay for all that. The Fiats, on the other hand, which are here today, there are 3 Fiats. Fortunately, because they were assembled in India, a lot of mechanical parts are still available with old-timers in India. But cosmetic parts are no longer available or very scarce, and you'll have to import those as well. So to get your car to a standard where one would say that, it's been nicely restored, there is a certain amount of, in fact, a substantial expense that goes in.
Now that you speak of how challenging it is in terms of budgetary constraints or even sourcing it because of the very nature of what we are talking about. There is one more thing, and as you were talking, I just happened to see, should not have, but there was a call from your mechanic, which is coming in your phone. Right. Now that leads me to a follow-up question. Their roles are very important. But is it a dying art? And if it is, then what is the future?
I am very glad to say that it is not a dying art.
Oh, I'm happy to know this.
Yes. Ever since, one of the byproducts of CDC starting, building a community and owners coming together has been that people who would usually take their cars and bikes out only once a year for statesmen are now taking their cars and bikes out virtually through the year. Today is a very hot day. People have taken their cars out. Okay? You wouldn't have seen this 10 years back. You wouldn't have seen this 5 years back. But because this community has been built and there's so much exchange of knowledge, where to obtain parts, mechanics, etc. The market for mechanics, that demand for mechanics has gone up. It has led to a situation where new restoration facilities have started. Okay. Mechanics have come to the forefront. Mechanics have been able to command, a lot of us grumble about it, but the fact is that they are now in a position to command higher daily wages than 10 years back. So an entire economy, small economy, microeconomy has been built around this, and I'm very happy to say that it is not a dying art. In fact, it is much better than it was 10 years back. So much so that when we have a flagship event at the Alipur Museum every year, Classic Drivers Club display at the Alipur Museum, 2 years back we started an award category where we actually recognize and award the people who work on the cars. Mechanics, electrical people, painters, upholsterers, etc. So we are trying as a community to bring them also into the limelight and not just feel that, you're a mechanic I'm giving you money, you fix it, etc., etc. They have like become a major part of this movement in keeping the vehicles going.
Right. That's something perhaps which is very, very important and perhaps one of the biggest achievements of CBC. To get a community going, and the moment you have people with a similar mindset together, I think this ecosystem automatically, becomes better. And these things, these problems are ironed out. I speak from the perspective of vintage watches. You have these old pendulum clocks in many of our old buildings in Calcutta. Now you don't have mechanics for the same. There are very, very few people, and therefore I thought that this would be a challenge. But then you have overcome this challenge wonderfully, and my compliments to you for this.
Let me actually tell you about these watches and clocks. You see, it so happens that I am a clock collector as well. And I am extremely pleased to tell you that over the last 1 year, not pleased to tell you that I've been collecting clocks, but something else. I have landed up with around 12 or 13 extremely nice English music clocks, along with grandfather clocks. There is one particular guy who's 26 years old. Okay?
That's very reassuring to know.
Yes. He has no family involvement or family background, like his father was a clocksmith, etc. Nothing. It just so happens that it's his passion.
And he's doing it out.
That is his profession, his passion. He fixes these clocks in his house. দুর্গা ঠাকুরের যে পুজোর ঘরটা আছে, ওই পুজোর ঘরেই সব ঘড়িগুলো রাখা থাকে, আর ওই পুজোর ঘরেই ঘড়ির কাজ করে।
Wonderful.
He has fixed all my clocks to excellent standards.
Lovely.
So
We'll be in touch after this. But that's, again, I'm going to push you a bit further on this, because perhaps this is the most challenging aspect of restoration. You have the advent of new technology. You have 3D printing and all of that, and I've seen that there are various restoration projects which take the help of these booming upcoming technologies. Has it penetrated in Calcutta, in India, and do you actually use these technologies to restore vehicles? Are you doing it now?
To put it simply, yes. In some cases we are. Laser CNC cutting, laser CNC cutting, water jet cutting, etc. for fine parts, especially cosmetic parts. We do take the use of modern technology. In certain cases where there are, like, say for example, just an example, like the Studebaker, a cosmetic part has gone bad or is not available. We can potentially, though I can't quite cite an example where it's actually been done in Calcutta, but we can potentially replicate parts through 3D printing. That is something which has started the world over. Similarly, if you want to diagnose something or mechanically chalk out a certain improvement in the engine area or mechanical area, you can use the factory blueprints and put it on CAD and make improvements on the design. In fact, let me tell you, talking about technology, a lot of our older cars, in fact, these old cars were never built for this kind of traffic. In the 30s, 40s, 20s, right up to the 80s, I would think, there was a lot less traffic. And the cars were meant to go, drive on the road, not stop, go, stand for 10 minutes, 15 minutes at a signal, etc. And it's getting hotter every year. As a consequence, some of the cars, the cooling systems are no longer adequate to keep the engine cool enough for today's traffic conditions. So what our club has done is, and we'll be launching it shortly, what our club has done is, thanks to one of our members, is basically he's adapted Bluetooth technology. It's an old concept. You have an auxiliary fan, electric fan, with a switch, and you put it on to aid the normal engine-driven fan in the car to provide extra cooling. But what we have done is basically adapted it with Bluetooth, and we've made sensors which automatically you can set the threshold temperature when you want the fan to come on as you're driving, so you don't need to consciously, toggle any switch. It will come on, it will cool off the engine, and when it's cooled off adequately, the fan will shut off. You can control it via the app that we have made through your mobile. So that is one of the uses of technology.
Adopting technology to suit your requirements. Wonderful initiative. Now, there's one thing which I want your perspective on. Now, this will be seen, restoration or owning even, like it is in today's rather egalitarian and democratic world. We tend to see this as an indulgence, as a luxury. But coming from the perspective of somebody who deeply cares about the city and the slowly fading heritage of it, I feel it's more of a responsibility. Where do you stand on this?
See, there's no two ways about it. We are after all a poor country. Right? One can't deny that. We are a poor country. So, it is an indulgence. I can't argue against that. It is an indulgence. However, we are not, pushing it down people's throats. Only those who are comfortable with it and have the passion. It is entirely voluntary. However, we are not doing it to satisfy our own egos. I think the broader picture over here, what we try to do is bring this aspect of heritage automobiles into the mainstream. This is what we've been trying to do for the last 8 years since our club started. We try our best to have public events. Unfortunately, there isn't, so far, we have not been able to get adequate access to public venues. Now, say, if we had a large display in the Maidan, it would be a hit. But we will never get a permission to have something on the Maidan. Statesman Vintage and Classica Rally in 1968, and for the next 10 years, actually started off on Red Road. It was a public event. Now, our clubs have events in other social clubs, in other private venues. And unfortunately, public access is restricted, which is where the idea of requesting HITCO and the Alipur Museum to have an event over there, and it has seen huge footfalls. In the 2 editions that we've had in winter, the Alipur Museum has seen huge footfall, but we wish that we could get access to wider and larger public spaces, because we are content and satisfied with our vehicles, but there's more to it. We reach out to more people. We have to reach out to more people. Like when this blue MGTC, the owner was bringing it out from his house day before night. People were passing by, youngsters were passing by, and they were like, "Arey, ये सब गाड़ी अभी भी चलता है." There's people are not aware.
There's a lot of lack of awareness.
There is a lack of awareness, and it's nobody is to blame. It just has to, we somehow have to get it in the mainstream.
I've always been of the opinion that the state, being the center, the state, I'm not on that, but the state as an authority must actively bring back these things into the mainstream, because it is not individually possible for like-minded people. Even if you have a vibrant community, you can only do thus far, and you can't take it there, take it forward from there. It has to be at a scale where, these things have to be brought into the mainstream for creating awareness, because I personally believe that these things must be preserved, because we have not been fortunate, or we have not had the possibility of witnessing these eras through our own eyes. So these are the instruments through which we are going to witness a lost, bygone era. And these things are the only avenues to do so. So unless that support is there from the state as a body, it gets very difficult. Now, leading on from there are legal challenges, I'm sure, because there are regulations which come in where they say that you are not going to fly vehicles which are older than 15 years. Again, there is a certain degree of lack of awareness which perhaps CBC is trying to address. But what are the legal challenges that you face?
Let me address the first part of what you just brought up. As far as the state is concerned, our state of West Bengal has been, over the last 1.5 years, extremely supportive of historic buildings. You see, that is the advantage of coming together and forming a club. As you said, individual voices cannot go up to the authorities and say that, we want this legislation, that legislation, etc. Do something for us. But through our club, we made a representation to the Transport Department, Government of West Bengal. We had several meetings with the Principal Secretary of Transport, who is a very fine IAS officer, Dr. Shoumitra, and we discussed at length with him the challenges that we face in terms of legality, paperwork, complying with these very stringent emission standards, the 15-year-old rule, which has been very confusing for most people across the country, not just West Bengal. And I'm very glad to, tell the public at large that over the last 1.5 years, thanks to our members' participation, Classic Drivers Club representation, etc., other clubs from India helping us to draft these proposals, the West Bengal government has taken out legislation where vintage and classic vehicles which are 50 years and older can ply on the roads. They can also apply for a separate vintage category registration, in which case you're exempt from current emission norms for modern cars, modern vehicles, and you can just go about your business of enjoying your historic vehicles in West Bengal, which is not the case in other states. Clubs in other states are also fighting for this and citing West Bengal as an example. These are official circulars which have come from the Department of Transport, Government of West Bengal. Also, let me tell you that our club has been helping the state government into developing its own heritage tag for historic vehicles. In fact, I don't want to talk too much about it because it's in the process, but there will be a time in the near future where the government of West Bengal will have their own tags for historic vehicles of the state, and they will be protected by the state.
Oh wow! So the state is actually playing a very proactive role.
Absolutely.
And perhaps the lion's share of the credit goes to an organization such as yours?
Well, yes, I would think so.
I think this deserves, yes, thank you very much for that. This deserves much of our appreciation, and perhaps since we have a constraint of time, we are towards the end of this conversation. I have two last questions. My penultimate question to you would be, what is the future of CBC and what is the change that you are looking to bring at a permanent level? How do you propose to increase awareness?
Okay, as far as the future of CBC is concerned, I am again very, very happy that a majority of our members comprise of people, enthusiasts and owners between the ages of 20 and around 45. In fact, a lot of the younger members were over here. I think they've
Gone for make that, get tattoos done.
get tattoos done. Or maybe they're looking for a beer. But there are a lot of younger members who have been drawn to historic vehicles. So much so that our clubs, events and activities are now mostly managed by them. Okay, I mean, we have been doing this for some time. There are members over here who are in their 70s and 60s, and they've been doing this for a long time. But now I'm very, very glad to see that there are now guys and girls in their 20s, mid-20s, late 20s, early 30s, career professionals, but who are deeply passionate about historic vehicles, and I'm sure that, they are going to, in the next few years, they are going to take over looking after these historic vehicles, and we all know that we are just temporary custodians of these cars. These cars, the two cars have been around since 1928. Nobody in this arena is alive who was born in 1928. The Studebaker has passed through four generations. The Ford has passed through 4 generations. These cars will survive long after us. We are just temporary custodians, passed on to the next generation, passed on to new owners, and it will continue. And as far as CBC is concerned, our job is to ensure that we take maximum advantage of new technology, which is why we have a thriving Instagram page. We have a Facebook page which has around 3,000 members. We have a collaborative YouTube channel. We also have tie-up with other clubs in India and clubs internationally, and we also happen to be the only club that is an affiliate club of the International Federation of Historic Vehicles, which is known as FIVA. We are the only club in India to be a FIVA affiliate club. So there is a lot that a club has to do. A lot has been done in the last 7-8 years, but a lot has to be done, and I'm sure that my club members, yes, we are heading in the right direction. And it is just not Classic Drivers Club. There is another entity also, which is run by equally passionate enthusiasts. They are doing their bit for the community and to protect the, heritage, automotive heritage of the state. We are doing our bit, and I think collectively, it's a win-win situation for all of us.
It's wonderful to know, and we end this conversation with a rapid fire round. Okay? And you have at max 10 seconds to answer each question. The first question, first car that you ever drove?
1939 Austin Ames Tourer.
One car you wish that you saw brand new at the factory when it was getting rolled out?
A Mercedes 300 SS.
the most dramatic breakdown that you have seen?
Oh, this is on a long tour that we were. The car's bonnet just flung open and flames came out.
Now, if you had to assign one of the two brands which I'm talking about, a Rolls Royce or an Ambassador, for a city like Calcutta, which would it be?
An Ambassador.
If your cars could talk, which car that you own would have the sharpest tongue?
Probably my 1963 Fiat.
According to you, I know that this is a difficult one, and there's a drum roll also in the background. Which is the most overrated vintage car that you've seen?
In India, the most overrated historic vehicle is a standard head.
And the most underrated one?
Definitely the Fiat 1100s. The fantastic vehicles.
If there is one historic figure that you would like to, take around for a ride, who would that figure be?
That's a tough one. Probably Buddhadev Bhattacharya.
Okay. Is there any reason for that?
Yeah, I was an admirer of his.
Right. So there's no politics to that answer. And the last one. One car that you would never sell.
Which I don't know in general.
Which, in general, if there is one car that if it finds your way into your garage, you would never sell that.
If I had a Porsche 356, I would never sell that.
Thank you, and that brings us to the end of this conversation. Wonderful talking to you.
Wonderful talking to you. Thank you for having me. Thank you.